Hello again, I'm Diane Strickland and I provide coaching and support for partners of sex addicts. This is my second video in a series I'm doing that tackles some myths about partners of sex addicts. And when I encounter these myths in my work with partners, they're often formidable obstacles to their recovery. So we're going to take a crack at a number of them in these videos and see if we can't get past them. Today's myth is a particularly difficult one, and it's what happens when a partner begins to fully engage her story and begin to understand what has happened to her, what has been done to her along the way by both the sex addict and perhaps therapists as well. And she begins to bring to the table the emotional energy of anger about that. And when she reads articles and books about partners, when she gets feedback from her sex addict or the therapist, or sees videos on YouTube by so-called experts, she is told directly or indirectly, "You're too angry." So the impression that she's given is that it's not that she's angry, it's that she's too angry. She's not just upset, she's too upset. She's not just frustrated, she's too frustrated. The partner is never the bowl of porridge that's just right. She's always too something, which of course just shuts her down and makes it impossible for her to do anything but try to imagine what else is wrong with her, to feel defensive, and to feel shamed by the degree of her anger. So in the shaming of our anger, in belittling it, and using it against us, the partner is never able to fully bring her experience to the table of the therapeutic journey. It just never happens. So we're going to dispel this myth today that you're too angry. And we'll use the same criteria that we used in the first video. That means I start by asking, what kind of reliability can we give that statement? And what is it based upon? When someone says you're too angry, what are they basing that on? So I look for something as simple as the SUDS scale, which is the Subjective Units of Distress Scale, which has been used for a number of decades now and is particularly used in work with people suffering from primary and secondary trauma, which means partners are prime candidates for that. But it's not ever referred to when you read about partners being too angry or hear about it. So then I'm looking for a more objective scale where we have perhaps a theoretical framework for understanding and analyzing anger, which uses maybe a simple Likert scale to assess the level of your anger. But that's not anywhere either when we hear that we're too angry. So I think we don't really have anything subjective or objective about the partner. We do have some information, however, about the therapist who gives us that. And that response is more about, it's their personal response to our anger. That's what it is. They are either incapable of receiving it, they simply don't want to receive it, perhaps they weren't trained to receive it, they don't know what to do with it. But the response is, here's a symptom, and I have nothing to manage it. So therefore, I'm going to shut it down. And that's how it's done. So there isn't a lot of reliability about any declaration that you're too angry. In fact, if you look up Dr. Manuela's article about the 13 ways that trauma is induced by the sex addiction experience, you'll find 13 pretty good reasons why a woman might be angry about what has happened to her. And some women have experienced all 13. The second criteria that I look at is the viewpoint of humanity, and particularly I'm looking at the viewpoint of women that is present in this myth. So we certainly know that professional shaming and general anxiety around women's anger has its roots in society. There's been lots of research on women's anger and society's difficulty in handling it and absorbing it and giving it any credence. It generally tends to stereotype it or make it disappear. Dr. Teresa Bernandez, a psychiatrist, was, unfortunately she's deceased now. She did an awful lot of research and spoke and wrote about women's anger and how difficult it was for women's voice to be heard if it was something that contained anger. Another person that's kind of interesting is Dr. Sandra Thomas, who's I think a nursing professor, and she did an interesting piece of work looking at what happens to women when they repress their anger and the kinds of ailments and diseases and things to their body and mind that happen as a consequence of that. And it's pretty devastating. And what we learn from the body of research and we come to understand is that generally society is more comfortable with the illnesses that repressed anger brings out in women than women's anger directly. So in other words, society would rather deal with a depressed woman than an angry woman. They'd rather deal with a woman who has heart disease or breast cancer or arthritis or terrible debilitating headaches. Those things society will accept in a woman before they will accept her anger. Now this viewpoint of women is essentially a remnant of the patriarchy that's still present and misogyny that is still very active and amazingly resilient. It says basically that if taking a woman's anger seriously challenges male entitlement or affords women a more credible place in society, we would rather they just be sick. The third thing that we use in our criteria for evaluating a myth is, does it sound like anything else we already know? And this, of course, it sounds like what many partners have experienced in this whole experience with their sex addict, with their treatment teams and people, which is blame shifting, gaslighting, stereotyping, diminishing and shaming the partner. And this is because the whole thing is an addict-centered treatment model, and essentially the woman is a prop. She's a prop. She's not a whole person. And if you deal with a person in a holistic way, you have a plan for their anger, and you don't start judging it right away until you find out what's underneath it. And that's certainly true of how the sex addict deals with her. She's just a prop in the facade that he needs to protect his secret life. And the message here in this experience is that your anger is a greater taboo than whatever has happened to you that causes that anger. Whatever offense or injustice has happened, your anger is worse than that. The fourth thing that we use is to look at what are the results when this myth is affirmed or allowed to continue. And part of what happens is that the appropriate place and role of anger in identifying an injustice or an offense is denied. So a woman's sense in her anger that something's really wrong here, very wrong, that I could be in danger, that I'm being victimized, that something's profoundly unfair, all of that is being suppressed, which makes her very vulnerable. In addition, the essential wound that has caused the anger is never named and understood, and there's no opportunity for it to heal. And that means the relationship doesn't really stand much of a chance. When the offenses and injustice experienced in it is never named and never dealt with. Another result is that women do get sick. They get profoundly sick, and they push the anger down so far. And I know in treating partners, when they finally express their anger to me, the unburdening of that is, it's honestly like you can hear the chains falling off them. The freedom to be able to say, this is how angry I am. When that can't happen, one of the things that happen is that they can become even angrier because it's injustice upon injustice. And that is a deep wound, and it takes a very long and skilled therapeutic commitment of both the professional and the partner to be able to undo that. So the results, there really aren't any good results at all. The fifth criteria for evaluating the myth is whether or not I can posit another explanation for the anger and why it is in fact critically important that we engage it, validate it, and understand where it comes from. Partner anger is rooted deeply in this experience of abuse and deception and betrayal. These are not little things, they're massive. They are core level violations. And they happen with the sex addict, but then again, they happen with members of the treatment team when, again, they are betrayed by their anger not being welcomed, by their experience being diminished, by their truth being dismissed. So it happens again and again. And it's particularly important because partners know that this abuse is not a compulsive thing. This kind of treatment of the partner is strategic, it's purposeful. It's not just a compulsive thing. This is particularly known because we know from our own experience, and Dr. Minwalla backs this up, that the traits of emotional and psychological abuse survive sexual sobriety. So even if the sex addict achieves that, they will continue to act out their abusive tendencies in strategic ways that continue to offend and abuse the woman, so that her anger, it can never really settle down. It goes on and on and on, and it's still not being recognized. The treatment model and its champions and practitioners, they seem to need to avoid what anger might teach them, because they might then have to address the fact that this isn't a simple sexual sobriety issue, that the sex addict is a deeply damaged human being and probably requires an assessment and a treatment protocol that is beyond their own training. And so there is some resistance to engage that potential reality. We are caught in this attempt to keep the treatment model from collapsing in on its own incompetence, that really the problem that we've got here is quite beyond what they're working with to deal with it. And we know that because there are no statistically relevant, significant results that prove this model of treatment is successful at all. When I think about my work with partners, and the kinds of stories they tell me about what they have endured, the terrible things that have been done to them and said to them, the way they've been treated by everybody in this story. I feel like I'm back 30 years ago when we were working on trying to deal with male violence against women around, men beating their wives and things, and how those victims were made responsible for that happening, or when rape victims are told that it's their own fault they're raped. I feel like we're in the same place with this current situation. And the abuse is just covered up and renamed, and a key part of that is denying the anger of its victims. That becomes a key piece of what's going on here. When you aren't afraid of what the anger can tell you and teach you about what is actually happening here and what is being done to women, it might become possible for the perpetrators to be correctly diagnosed and correctly treated. There's actually hope for everyone when you deal with this key symptom that's being dismissed. It's a very difficult topic, and you'll notice I've been looking at some notes because I knew that I would not be able to just carry on without referring to kind of keep me going on the right direction here. And that's because my own practice with partners, the stories just are turning over in my head right now about the things that they have endured and the anger that they were denied. And it makes my throat almost close over, and I want to throw up. I think I want to tell partners, you aren't too angry. You are not too angry. You are, in fact, the bowl of porridge that's just right in this situation. Your anger is a red flag that's telling you that you have been violated at the core level of your identity and your values, and that sometimes that violation continues. And I want you to know that your anger has an appropriate place and role, and that when you become a priority in a treatment model, like we make you a priority at sisterhoodofsupport.org and marriedtoasexaddict.com, we know you're angry, and we make room for it. We know that that's not the whole of you, that there's a whole other story about who you are, and that if and when your anger is validated and you can begin to really understand why it's there, you then have the tools to know what you need to heal, how to be safe, and how to be whole again. Anger does not have to run your life, and it does not have to ruin your life. We believe that when it's addressed properly, you can go on to live a healed life and a whole life, and joy is yours again. You can be yourself again. This is justice work, and that's what you name it when you take anger seriously and we make you a priority. And that's what we try to do. Thanks again for watching, and you take care now.